House Republicans Trey Gowdy and Bob Goodlatte are demanding the appointment of a new special counsel to investigate the abuse of civil liberties by the DOJ and the FBI. We'll have the latest on that in just a minute. But first tonight, former Trump campaign aide Sam Nunberg went on television yesterday, and the news world ground to a halt. Nothing else happened. Americans stopped dying of drug ODs. The world's post-war order stopped collapsing. Robots stopped taking our jobs. The borders were secure because for most of the day, all that mattered was Sam Nunberg. Watch.
Good evening. I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, breaking news. Defiant and speaking out, Trump's former campaign aide, Sam Nunberg, refusing to comply with a grand jury subpoena in the Russia investigation.
This is exactly what the White House did not want to hear. So you have to wonder, what does Sam Nunberg really know?
Perhaps unprecedented comments from a former Trump campaign aide who says he's been subpoenaed.
In the history of American news media, we had never witnessed anything like this.
Who writes news copy? Russian bots, non-English speakers for sure. Sam Nunberg speaking out. But wait, who is Sam Nunberg exactly? Well, until just yesterday, he was a pretty obscure part-time political consultant from New York City who's apparently been struggling with a substance abuse problem. He's actually a pretty nice guy, but you probably never heard of him. Almost nobody had heard of him. And now the media are telling you that Nunberg could be the key to this whole scandal, the John Dean of this fake Watergate. Except that unlike John Dean, Nunberg was nowhere near the decisions when they were made. He worked at a low level of the Trump campaign before it was actually a campaign. He left almost a year and a half before the election. If there was indeed a Russia conspiracy, Sam Nunberg would not know anything about it. More likely, what was going on yesterday, Nunberg brilliantly played the press, because it turns out this Friday he's talking to Robert Mueller's investigators, which is yet another measure of how absurd this independent counsel investigation is if you're talking to Sam Nunberg. Others, though, have been charged with perjury after doing interviews with Mueller's investigators. Nunberg will not be. Why? Because he just admitted in public to being an alcoholic and then acted like a lunatic on television for hours. It is the perfect preemptive insanity defense. Mueller can't indict him. After yesterday, no jury would convict Sam Nunberg. Was that Nunberg's plan? Well, we don't know, really. But if it was, none of the people interviewing him yesterday would have figured it out, because there is nobody dumber than most cable news hosts at CNN and MSNBC. How dumb? Well, dumb enough to see Russian saboteurs under every bed. Russia, the place, the actual country, is grim and hopeless. It's got a lower than replacement birth rate. It's got waning power on the world stage. It has one military base outside its borders. It's not a major player anymore. But the imaginary Russia, the one you see on television every night, has never been more powerful. At the DNC and NBC News, Vladimir Putin is diabolical and omnipotent. Putin put Trump in office. He gave the Senate nomination in Alabama to Roy Moore somehow. He empowered the NRA. He likely handpicked seasoned masters of espionage like Sam Nunberg and Carter Page to undermine our democracy. It's delusional, but they fervently believe it. Meanwhile, back in the real world, evidence mounts that the actual problem is not the Russians or Vladimir Putin. It is the corrupt and decadent and resolutely stupid leadership of our own elites. That is why Trump got elected, in reaction to them. That's why the European Union is in the process of collapsing. Just this weekend in Italy, while we were all talking about Sam Nunberg, the ruling party there was crushed while anti-establishment candidates won big. Voters, the polls showed, were deeply unhappy with economic policies that have enriched a few while stealing the future from young people. They hated the immigration policies that have crushed their national culture under waves of migrants. Sound familiar? Well, there, as here, the elites have failed. But they can't admit that. They can't face their own failure. So instead, they blame the unseen hand of Russia. Former Obama official Samantha Power actually said that out loud in a tweet. Russia won the Italian election, she explained. Well, maybe Samantha Power and her friends at MSNBC and the rest have no choice but to keep pretending. If our ruling class admitted the sad truth about Russia, they'd have to take responsibility for their own ineptitude and failures, and they won't, and so the insanity continues. Christy Setzer is a Democratic strategist, president of New Heights Communications, and a connoisseur of the Russia story. She joins us tonight. So, Christy, this Italian thing happened, and I'm not saying it's the most important thing to happen this year, but it's another domino that is leading clearly toward the dissolution of the European Union, toward the order in Europe and in this country, by the way. Russia did that?
It's possible that they played a role. It's possible. What we have seen, and these two things can both be true at the same time. It can, one, be true that organically, independently, we are seeing across the globe these movements that are populist, that are anti-immigrant, that have a lot of different things in common, and also it being true that Russia's sort of stirring the pot. We have recently found out that that Russian troll farm was spending $1 million a month in 2016 in the U.S. elections to sort of, again, stir the pot, to influence their elections by supporting Donald Trump and going negative on Hillary.
The Democrats spent over $1 billion. Look, I'm not saying that Russia is not trying to destabilize the United States. What I'm saying is it's irrelevant. And if you look at the actual poll numbers, they show pretty consistently in a lot of different countries that people are dissatisfied with the leadership of the people in charge. And that's why Trump got elected. That's why Brexit happened. That's why Scandinavia is about to turn. That's why we almost had Marine Le Pen in France. In each one of these cases, the elites, rather than accept any responsibility, blame an unseen foreign hand. You don't see a thread here?
I think, as I just said, that both things can be true. It is true, on one hand, that that there was unrest among the country that was unhappy with the leaders that that they've been given for the last, I don't know, couple decades. At the same time, it's also true that Russia has been grooming Donald Trump for years. At least that's what the Steele dossier says.
But hold on, wait. I don't think it's fair or honest to say that the allegation is that Russia is just helping populist or right-wing movements like Trump or Berlusconi or Marine Le Pen. The claim is also that the Russians were helping Bernie Sanders.
That's right.
Right? And that they were helping Jill Stein. And, of course, they were
helping anti-Hillary Clinton.
They're paying
That's what they were
for
doing.
the most left-wing cable station there is, RT. So it's a little more complicated. So Rolling Stone...
It's a pro-Russia station. It's not necessarily left-wing.
But I'm just saying...
The two are not the same.
Maybe the obvious is true, which is the people in charge, as represented by the morning show on MSNBC or whatever. You know what I mean? Like the people who've actually been making policy for the past 30 years haven't taken into account the views of voters, and voters are mad about that. And so rather than like learn something from what's happening, they're blaming forces that aren't there, the Russians.
The Russian forces are, in fact, there, and I think all you have to do is listen to not just Samantha Power. You can listen to any one of, you can listen to our own Secretary of State. You can listen to Rex Tillerson. You can listen to Mike Rogers.
But I don't care because none of those people is wise, beginning with Samantha Power, whose foreign policy has left the region in tatters. I mean, if you really, I mean...
She's also not in power.
No, she's not. Anymore. But she's implicated in the disaster that is the world 2018 that Democratic voters in democratic nations across the West are reacting against. So do you think there's any coincidence that the Russia hoax is being used to discredit anybody, not on the right, but anyone who challenges power? You haven't noticed that?
Well, obviously, I deeply disagree with calling it a Russia hoax. Again, if we can go back to what the origins of the Russia, quote, hoax were, it went back to well before the 2016 election. But that's when we first learned about it, was, as you may remember from one of the debates with Hillary Clinton, when she talked about 17, intelligence agencies in the U.S. have all concluded that Russia has been trying to meddle, and I hate that word because it's so weak, but have been trying to influence U.S. elections. We didn't listen to that story because we were too busy talking about
emerged. No evidence has emerged from that day till now. Britt, you've been in the media for a long time and television for many decades. When you saw Sam Nunberg on yesterday, did you think to yourself, I would have put him on if I were bureau chief, or I wouldn't have put him on if I were bureau chief?
Well, I very much hope, Tucker, that I would not have. And it was worth noting that before the day was over, CNN's Erin Burnett had looked at him and said, I smell liquor on your breath. Could she have been the first and only CNN anchor to notice that the guy was probably drunk? Not only that, he's plainly a very troubled soul. And, as a journalist, when you come along, you don't have to make a psychiatric diagnosis to recognize that somebody you're talking to may not be, okay, and that whatever this person says may be indeed questionable. And yet this guy held sway over the airwaves, as you pointed out earlier, for hours on end, particularly on CNN, but I guess others picked it up, and it got quite a rod yesterday. And, of course, the principal thing that made the headline, Tucker, was when he said that he wasn't going to cooperate with Mueller. Well, by this morning, that was all gone, and he said, indeed, he was going to cooperate with Mueller. As a matter of fact, he had very little choice. But that was a non-story that lived all day long because it feeds this whole narrative that there's something terribly wrong and that we have an unqualified president under the influence of Russia and God knows what else.
And so to make that point, you have someone who's under the influence of alcohol to jump around the set and humiliate himself, but not only that, degrade the person who's interviewing him. I mean, I wonder if there's a cost long term when you do stuff like that.
Well, you know, I think, Tucker, what we're looking at here is that there's been a belief for the longest time that the Trump election was illegitimate. And there's been a sense in the media that his election constitutes a kind of national emergency because he is such an unqualified character and